Good day to you, my friends. Eric McCool here of Permagora Live, coming at you on March 20th, 2020. Wanted to let y'all know I'm going to be doing my first interview with a good friend of mine and a mentor of mine, someone who actually had a profound effect on my life through a book he wrote. And I've told that story many times. I'm not going to go into it now, but essentially, once I started searching for answers and wondering what the heck I could do about what I saw as a looming problem of an unstable civilization, I found a book online called Final Empire, The Collapse of Civilization and the Seed of the Future. I can show it to you here, even though it's going to show it backwards. This is Bill's book, and this is the back cover, which I always liked the contrast of these images, and that's really the essence of this book. The first two-thirds of it outline more or less why civilization is going to collapse, because it always does, and how it essentially undermines its own substrate by destroying the ecology that it's based on. All civilizations are based on ecology. They're based on the fact that nature produces abundance. It produces food and water, and there's air, and there's habitat for all this diversity of life. And most organisms on the planet live in balance with nature and don't destroy it in order to exist from it. And civilization is distinct from indigenous or natural living by the fact that it actually does destroy the substrate in order to produce excesses of wealth. So there is wealth inequality in animal kingdoms and in natural human cultures. When I say wealth, I mean access to privileges, things like that. But there is nothing like we see in industrial civilization or even pre-industrial civilization, where you have pyramid structures, both literal and figurative. Although there's debate about the pyramids, they might have come from an even earlier time period. But the point is that symbol of a very few at the top who have everything, and then all the things below have way less. And all of the wealth gets funneled up to the top and basically buried in tombs. That sort of situation, that sort of scenario is inherently self-destructive. The floor always falls out from under it. And our global civilization, because of the fact that we've globalized, more or less, means that when the floor falls out from under this one, it's going to be worse than anything we've ever seen in our lives. And I saw this kind of unfold in a vision before I read this book, before I even knew about it. And that's why I looked it up. I looked up the collapse of civilization online, wondering like what other people have been saying about this. And it turns out there's a whole genre. There's a whole collapse genre, because basically it's not that complicated. It's a pretty simple equation. You can calculate that if you're, extracting more than you're putting back in, if you're expanding exponentially in a finite playing field, then there's a wall that you're going to hit or a cliff you're going to go over. And so when I read Bill's book, I was just like, oh my gosh, now I get it. I understand. We have been living in this total lie, this total illusion, and we're just going about our business thinking everything's fine. But in reality, we are on we have a very short time clock as to how long we have here in this current, situation. And I wrote a letter to Bill asking him, hey, how do I get involved in some of this stuff? I learned from him in this book the term permaculture. I'd never heard of it. And this was in 2004. Permaculture's been around since the early 70s. So just goes to show what my $60,000 education did for me. Didn't even give me the concept of designing sustainable systems, utilizing technology, but also utilizing indigenous ancient practices and wisdom. So I discovered permaculture, discovered the idea of eco-villages, and I wanted to get involved. So I wrote Bill a letter, and he wrote me back and was encouraging and basically told me that I would probably be better to get out of Texas and go up to the Northwest, because there was a lot more permaculture going on up there at the time. And certainly that was true. So that began my journey. And Bill, once I moved up to Oregon, became a very close friend and one of my closest friends. I saw him almost every day for many years, and we sat around and talked, and we had great conversations. And it was such an educational time period for me and inspirational. So Bill, being a real OG of the collapse genre, has some interesting perspective about what's going on now. And I spoke with him on the phone yesterday, and I was pleasantly surprised to hear how optimistic he was and how he is seeing what's going on now as a wake-up call. And he's under the impression that this is going to wake people up, and that we are going to see in the wake of this a huge abandonment of old ineffective systems and a large move towards permaculture, natural living, and community oriented projects. I don't know how to say that, but we're going to have to start working together. And he cited the Great Depression, how during the Roaring Twenties, people were, living large and didn't care about anything about, where the food came from. And it was kind of a similar case to what we have now, except when the Great Depression hit, it was a big wake-up call, and people had to go back to the farm, and they had to start being a little more scrappy with their money, and saving things and all that. And then he went on to talk about how unions started being organized after that, and how it was such a impetus to get people to stand up to the sort of corporate giants that were basically utilizing them as near slave labor, and they started to get better conditions for themselves, and they rallied against what was at the time a form of tyranny. And he believes that we'll do that again. And I'm going to let him say more of that when we talk later today. I'm not sure when I'll get that video up. It's been taking me a while to get these up, so probably it'll come up tomorrow. And this will probably come up tomorrow, so who knows how I might just post them all at once. But anyhow, today, aside from announcing that I'm going to be having a talk with Bill, I want to talk a little bit about what I just went into, which is the sort of optimist or the apocalyptimist point of view, which, in spite of the fact that my previous videos on this channel have been somewhat like raising the alarm, like we are in trouble here, I don't want people to get the impression that I think we're all doomed and that we're all just gonna, we're just waiting for them to gas us from the skies. While that's still a possibility, I'm not acting as if that's the case. I'm acting as if we now have the opportunity to organize together and create something new, and to more or less abandon these old systems, including many government organizations, many so-called authorities that we have been entrusting our health and safety to. We need to realize that these people are not doing us any favors. They're not actually serving us. And that's all very easy to discover if you just follow money and look at who funds the CDC or any of these big organizations, where they came from, learn the history of these things. It becomes pretty clear that we've all been had. But as I said, the focus that I want to have overall on this channel, Permagora, is not about doom and gloom. It's about, with permaculture and agorism, we can change the whole planet, and we can create the garden paradise planet that we were meant to have, that was designed for us originally, and we were born into it, and over thousands of years, we have changed it into this prison planet of economics and military, and the system we live under is a fascist system. It always has been. Of course, that word is new, but the idea of control by force, do what we say, or, you'll be hurt, that has been what has ruled our civilization. And that era is coming to a close, and it's up to us to rebuild something new. And that's why we need to stay in communication, and why we need to start designing these things and putting them in practice on the ground. So, that being said, I will go over a few other things that I've been seeing. I've been getting some feedback from people, a lot of positive feedback from my channel, people saying, hey, thanks for broadcasting, thanks for sharing, and keep it up. And other people are kind of saying, hey man, you're spreading panic, you're scaring people, like don't do that, everything's going to be fine. And my response to those people is, I would like to recall, let's say in the past, I'm not going to say exactly how far back because I can't even remember, but in the past, there have been plenty of people who theorized and did research, and not just theorized, but gave evidence for the fact that the government was spying on us through the internet and through our phones and through data collection. And before Snowden released that information to the public in an irrefutable way, that notion was considered a conspiracy theory, and everyone considered those people crazy and considered that those people needed to just calm down and stop worrying and just roll their eyes, tinfoil hat, all the usual jokes. So what I'm pointing out here is that when the truth was revealed and that the conspiracy theorists were proven 100% right, you didn't see a whole like, oh my gosh, all the people who made fun of them are like, oh my gosh, they were right. We have to do something about this, right? Or maybe some did, but certainly not very many people. Nobody came to me and apologized and said, hey man, you were right. I'm sorry that I made fun of you for that. Like, I didn't get any of that. What we got was a mindset that said, oh, well, that may be true, but, and this notion that we're going to rationalize it now instead of deny it. And I feel like we're in a situation where that's happening again. I feel like people who are trying to tell me that everything's fine and that I need to stop theorizing that the government is out to get us and that there's these bad guys who are trying to do bad things. The reason that's an easy point to take is because that's a pretty low resolution answer. Oh, there's these conspirators. It's like, well, who? And how do you know? What proof do you have? And as I said yet in another video, like, it takes dozens or hundreds of hours to really go over and grasp the answer to the question of who are they, because there's lots of them and it's compartmentalized. It's not just one guy, although there are some people that we might consider to be at the very top of it. There's a whole lot of people involved and they don't all know the whole story probably. But the point I'm making is that we have been saying for a long time that martial law, medical martial law even, that's not something that we saw this, we foresaw this potential. James Corbett did a great piece on medical martial law years ago. And just the concern that those of us who are skeptical have had is that the government will contrive some reason, some outbreak, which they may have even well created themselves, and then they'll start locking everybody down. And we've been saying that will happen, and now it's happening. And we're not, just like with the NSA and all the spying, we're not getting a lot of response from people who used to make fun of us to come and say, hey, wow, you were right about that. Now I'm kind of concerned. Instead, we're getting, oh, let's just flatten the curve and let's just do whatever the government says so that we can all get through this together. And while I admire the band together, make personal sacrifices for the greater good mentality, I advise people against following the script that's being given to you by the mainstream media or any government organization. They're just providing an easy rationalization and blindfold, really, to the reality of the situation. And while that's certainly tempting to just hope that everything's going to be fine and things are just going to go back to normal after a few weeks or a few months, I don't think that it's a safe position to take. And I think that we really need to look deeply into who we're dealing with and what sorts of history these organizations have. And so all I'm saying is you can't deny it anymore. The conspiracy theorists were right, have been right, and are right. And obviously there's a lot going on in the conspiracy world, and a lot of it is either just, out there nonsense that someone made up for fun or out of ignorance or just out of like thinking they're right and thinking that this means this, kind of a beautiful mind, right? Like where he's like looking through the magazines and thinking that all this is code. Like there's a lot of that, and I'm not denying that, but there is serious legitimate research that's been done for decades about the conspirators, who they are and what their plans are, and so far it's all been right. I watched David Icke's response to all of this. He was being interviewed by somebody, and he had a pretty solid case, which is basically he looks a lot less crazy now than he did back in the day, because he's been warning of this for a long time. And now that it's happening, people aren't denying that it's happening. They're denying what it means. Or at least they're disputing the narrative of what it means. And they're attempting to say it just means that this virus is real dangerous and we all need to basically cut off, stop our whole lives in order to protect ourselves from it. And I am not trying to even get into that. It's like, I feel like everyone has the right to self-isolate if they want. Like, if you're worried about getting sick, then by all means, quarantine yourself. And I've said this in a previous broadcast. You don't get to tell other people they have to quarantine themselves. That's just not the way it works. That's not the way I operate. And so, there's others like me out there who are not going to be told what to do. We don't just say, jawohl, mein Führer, and go on to the cattle car, right? Like, you don't listen to these people when they start telling you that they're locking you down for your own good. This is a script we've seen before. Not exactly like this, because this is a whole new situation, but we've seen totalitarianism rise before. It was, caught on video, a lot of it, in the 40s and in the 30s. Like, there is hard evidence of the fact that this happens and has happened in the past. And for people to be in denial of the fact that it's happening now seems pretty crazy to me. But I am definitely not trying to be an argumentative, this is not a debate about whether or not it's happening. If you're watching my channel, I'm assuming that you're starting to grasp or have long already grasped that this is real and we need to take this seriously. However, I want to reiterate that my message is not that we need to panic or we need to, go out and start shooting people, but we do need to prepare for all possibilities, including a hot war. Like, we don't know how it's going to go. But we know that wars have been fought in the past over the concept of freedom. Our country only exists because people stood up to what they considered to be tyranny, fought a long, bloody war, and eventually came away with more freedom than the world had ever seen anywhere. It was a novel concept. And plenty to be said about the hypocrisy of those slave-owning people writing the Bill of Rights guaranteeing freedom for everybody. And I'm not trying to go there. I'm just trying to say that the emergence of the United States as a nation was a brand new anomalous thing. And it happened because patriots stood up and fought for that right. And that may well be what we have to do. However, the best way to fight, I think, is not with guns. I think it's with information to start with, and then with implementations, permaculture installations, community organization. Basically, in defiance of federal or state law, we can create new laws that empower people to grow food and to make textiles without being taxed and without being regulated and without being told that they don't have a business license and so therefore they can't sell their kombucha or whatever it is. It's like, now's a good time to start ignoring all those regulations and to start doing business with each other as if we have the right to do it. And, depending on how this all looks, I think we may get to a point where no one's even going to interfere with that, where no one's going to be trying to enforce a quarantine. It's like people are going to be so hungry, they're going to be trying to force you to get out there and work in the fields. Like they're going to be, encouraging gatherings of people in order to figure solutions to big problems. And we who have been into permaculture and into the restoration of the planet for a long time, we all know that there are plenty of really viable solutions. The work of Paul Stamets in mycology, the work of permaculturists, the work of people who have been pioneering grassroots economic alternatives, which a lot of the like Nextdoor and even some things like Uber, these are, that's a big corporation now, and it's probably not as pure of an idea as what I'm trying to get at. But the idea that we can use peer-to-peer open source systems and not rely on these centralized, centrally controlled institutions, that's sort of the message that I'm trying to get across. And I'm hoping that everyone will think about what they could contribute to a world that we might rebuild ourselves. Imagine that this virus wiped out all the regulatory bodies, all of the controlling institutions that are telling you what you can or can't do. And now you can do whatever you want. What do you want? Do you want to plant some fruit trees and set up some water retention systems and start building or purchasing equipment that can help you to make your own clothes or make your own candles or work with metal and even 3D printing? These are all options we have now, assuming we can maintain the distribution systems, assuming we can maintain that artifice of civilization. While we still have it, we should be using it to set up for its eventual demise, which may or may not happen, but the odds are not for it. Like the odds are against this consumer civilization continuing. And so I feel like we ought to be using this time to make preparations for a new world in which we are the authors of our own destiny and we can live in this planet in peace and have meaningful work that supports us and provides for our needs and have access to nature and have time with our family and friends. That's what I'm hoping for, and that's what I'm going to be active in creating in my community here. And hopefully I'm going to be connected to and involved with other communities around the world, because as much as I am rooting in here in North Carolina and I love it here, I feel like I'm connected to this whole world in a certain way. And part of my role in this whole scenario, as I've understood it, has been a sort of network builder or maintainer and a bridge builder between separate worlds, and the notion that we have to kind of cross-pollinate with ideas in order for this to work, because collectivizing the task of solving all these problems is our best bet. Collectively, we're stronger, we have more minds, and if we can work together harmoniously, we can lick this thing. We can actually use this to our advantage and create a whole new, better world out of the sort of ruins of this old one that we really ought to abandon. And hopefully this whole time of martial law and scarcity and troops on the streets and any of that stuff, any of the real scary scenarios that are already unfolding, let's have that be a wake-up call. But let's not let that become normalized, and let's not start to think that this is what has to be in order for us to thrive on this planet. We can do better than this. So that's all I got for this morning. Hope that y'all are doing well. I welcome any feedback, and also, just so you know, if anyone wants to come on the show and talk with me and share their perspective, hit me up. Let me know. We'll arrange it, and I am open to discussion of almost any topic, honestly. Like, if you want to disagree with me and say that, oh, this is all fine, or say, no, this is a virus, is real dangerous, and we should all be freaking out because of the virus, anything. Like, let's talk. Let's see who's got, who can lay out a case that makes sense. And I'm open to hearing things that may not be already, on my, that I may not already be espousing. I'm open to learning and changing my perspective if someone can convince me otherwise. So anyhow, peace to y'all. Take care, and we'll see you next time around.